Welcome back from the break, everybody. Our next session, we should get some fireworks, I hope. It's clean energy under fire. There's a lot of news in this sector these days. And to lead this panel, I want to bring out my good friend, Andrew Shapiro, who's the founder and CEO of Go Ventures. And Andrew's going to tell us what this is all about. Andrew, come on out. Thank you, Andrew.
All right, thank you, Brian, and thank you, everybody. We have a great panel here, Clean Energy Under Fire. You know, the context here is, you could say, this is in some ways the best of times and the worst of times for clean energy. It depends on whether we're looking at the US or the global situation, which we'll talk about. It depends on which clean energy generation sources we're talking about. We'll get into talking about renewable energy, wind and solar. We'll talk about nuclear. And we'll also talk about natural gas. But as I was looking at some headlines, I mean, if you look back at the last year, I mean, the US policy process is broken. On the intergovernmental global level, we haven't made progress. We've had the rise of Chinese production and use of solar and wind. The European debt crisis, which is causing reverberations in this market and pullback of subsidies. Just a little more than a year ago, the Fukushima crisis. The Solyndra bankruptcy last fall, which obviously became a political football. The bankruptcy of a major, once the largest solar company, Q-Cells in Germany. And just today, I was looking at headlines, First Solar, the largest US solar company, just announced a 30% reduction in its workforce globally. So these are tough times. But there's a lot of interesting things going on, and we couldn't really have a better group of folks to discuss this. Steve Bowles is the CEO of GE Power and Water, which is a $30 billion business within General Electric. He's also a senior executive of General Electric, and he's going to talk to us about all the things that GE is doing as a leader in clean energy technology. We have Lou Hay, the CEO of NextEra, which is, as you probably all know, the utility that owns Florida Power and Light and also deregulated assets. And they are actually the largest owner of renewables in the United States. #1 in wind with 8 gigawatts, utility scale solar, hydro, also nuclear, and obviously a lot of natural gas. And then Governor Christie Whitman, also the former administrator of the EPA in the Bush administration. And she has been a longtime leader on clean energy and is also the co-chair of CASE, which is working on nuclear energy information awareness and advocacy here in the US. So folks, let's start, I think, the place that everybody is curious to know your views on, which is, what hath wrought natural gas for clean energy? What does it mean? This unbelievable surge in availability of gas because of the shale gas resources, the advent of fracking technology, is it good or bad for clean energy? And Steve, what does it mean for GE?
You know, Andrew, maybe I'd just start by echoing it's dynamic but exciting times right now, global power. You know, our perspective at GE comes from over 100 years of experience. About a quarter of the world's electricity is generated by GE technology today. And what I would say is that as we look at that, there's no silver bullet. It's diversity. And your mix will change based on where you are in the world and what fuels you have access to, and various attributes of the specific locations. Lots been talked about with natural gas right now. I think everybody's pretty aware of the reserves that are available, but particularly around the economics of unconventional gas resources. And that's been a real game changer for not only the pricing, but as far as the long-term viability. Some people have talked about gas historically as a bridge fuel. Now they're talking about it more as a destination fuel. But I'll give you a couple perspectives.
Just explain what a bridge fuel is, just so people understand.
Bridge fuel to renewables, let's say, as people talked about that, versus a destination fuel, i.e. long-term baseload power. I think that's where you hear it the most. But a couple perspectives on natural gas power. One of which is it can be used for baseload source of power. And as far as some other options, you can get those plants built, you know, in a quicker time frame. Second of which that's getting a lot more attention now is it enables more renewables penetration. Wind is not a baseload source, solar not. What happens in areas of the world, like Spain and others, where they have heavily renewables penetrations is their gas turbines don't run base load. They cycle up, cycle down as those renewables come offline. So I think that's a second big area of attention for natural gas power. I think the third of which is the ongoing combination between energy needs and water dynamics. And if you look at gas-fired power and some of its water usage, while it does use it, it's less so than some of the other options of baseload power. And we're actually introducing some gas turbines right now that require no water usage. So I think it's not just about the pricing of natural gas, which has changed some of the dynamics, particularly in the US, but it's some of the flexibility features as well as the water that's really shifting it more towards a mindset around the destination fuel.
And how is GE going to market when it comes to thinking about gas as an enabler of clean energy and renewables? How are you doing that? Is that demand coming from utilities and other customers?
There's no question about it. The demand is around the world, not only from China, but through Europe, down into the US. We announced last year the results of a $500 million GE investment in our Flex Efficiency 50 combined cycle power plant launch. Single highest combined cycle power plant in the world in terms of efficiency, but also flexibility. That's what's important. For many years, it was only about efficiency. This is about flexibility, efficiency, as well as reliable, affordable power. That we announced in Turkey. We also have announced one with EDF in France, the largest facility, utility in the world, and also in China. So those kind of investments will continue. But again, it's about not only efficiency, but about flexibility of that power.
So what does flexibility mean? If I have a wind farm or solar farm and I buy a flex efficiency turbine, what does it allow?
You can bring up the power for a city of the size of 800,000 people in less than 30 minutes.
And so
Quick
that
power.
allows you to be more dependent on those renewables.
Absolutely. And that's what's going on in places in the world that have heavy renewables penetration, is you see that going on, and you need that sort of flexible backup power to do that. But gas power also can be used for baseload power. So that's why you see really a lot more of the attention in that space right now. But I go back to my first point, which is our view has always been diversity. And while gas power is getting a lot of attention, it's driving some of our investments and some of the acquisitions GE made over the last year as we see a gas cycle. It's also about diversity as we spend across the whole energy spectrum.
We'll get back to that topic because I think how we promote diversity is such a tough and important topic. Lou, what is the clean energy portfolio that you have at NextEra? What's been the impact of this advent and availability of natural gas for your portfolio in wind and solar particularly?
Well, I'll answer the wind and solar in a second. We are a company that produces power through all sorts of means, and most people who know us outside of Florida know us as the biggest renewables energy producer in the country, but we're also the biggest consumer of natural gas in the country. So low natural gas prices actually have a big impact on our business, some good, some bad. We like having a diversified portfolio. Things tend to balance out. So we're building 3 very large natural gas-fired combined cycle units in Florida right now. Up until gas really came down in price, we saw demand for renewables, not just because you had some markets where people, whether they had a renewable portfolio standard or it was people like we saw on the panel earlier today who wanted to have a better environmental footprint, but we were selling particularly wind energy because it was economic. We're entering contracts, depending on where you are in the United States, for wholesale power under 3 cents a kilowatt hour, and that beat everything. And frankly, even for a brand new natural gas plant, it's kind of hard. I mean, wind at that price can still be very competitive, especially if you don't know what the price of natural gas is going to be for the next 30 or 40 years. And remember, these assets do stick around for quite some time. But having said that, with uncertainty over the production tax credit, we saw a huge amount of demand for wind and solar in the past year or so, and we're keeping Steve's plants running flat out, but the demand just is kind of dropping for next year until we have clarity on the production tax credit and people have a better sense of where gas prices really are going to be.
So let's talk about the production tax credit for wind. This is specifically for wind, which expires at the end of this calendar year unless it's renewed by Congress.
That's right.
You know, we're talking about some estimates of 9 gigawatts of installed wind in the United States this year, but that could drop by 60% next year. I mean, the thing just falls off. And in fact, if you go back historically at other times when the PTC was not extended, wind just devolved, it disappeared the next year in the US. What do we need to do, Lou, to get that production tax credit extended? Do you think it'll happen? And if not, what's going to happen to the wind business in the US?
Well, geez, that's about 5 questions. First of all, I think it drops, I don't know what Steve's view on it is as a supplier, but I think it drops by a lot more than 60%. From all the developers I talk to, and I know our own business, it goes to virtually zero next year if the production tax credit doesn't get extended soon. There's a lot of folks who think if it does get extended, it's going to get extended somewhere in the lame duck Congress. I think that is the highest odds time period for getting it extended. But frankly, if it gets extended then, and if it's only a 1-year extension, there's still going to be very little wind built next year. It's either got to be a multiple year extension or it has to get extended much sooner than post-election. So it's going to have some pretty devastating impacts on the wind industry. I think it has a bigger impact on suppliers because the whole supply chain, what's it going to do if there's no demand? As a developer, we've got projects in Canada, we've got projects elsewhere. We'll keep developing and moving along, but we are at risk of losing the U.S. supply chain if we don't do something soon. So what can people do? And I do think this is a really big issue because wind, the production tax credit has worked for wind. The unit cost of wind has come down dramatically. It keeps coming down. Companies like GE and others keep investing and getting more and more efficient. It leverages investment. For every dollar the government puts forward in production tax credits, it's anywhere from $5 to $10 of private investment. So that's jobs and investment going into the economy. But more important than all of that is it pays for itself. The incremental taxes that a wind farm throws off over its life, you take the present value of that, it far exceeds the production tax credit. So I think it's good public policy because it's doing all the right things. Hopefully the rest of you agree with me on that. And if you do, write your congressman, write your congresswoman, your senators, anybody in government you possibly can, because it's of vital importance. And I think you're right, Andrew. I think it could be 10,000 megawatts of wind energy that is sort of on the table as to whether it gets built or not next year, which could have a big environmental impact. But on top of that, if we lose the wind production tax credit, I think you're going to lose it for nuclear eventually, and I think you're going to lose it for solar.
Solar, yeah.
Maybe just one thing, a couple things I'd add to that. One of which is we're talking about the U.S. industry. Clearly, it's a global industry right now for wind. But the U.S. industry this year, second only probably to China. And they're probably dueling each other in terms of size. But without a PTC extension, that's going to drop.
Yeah.
And there's no question about it. And it has been, to Lou's point, successful. It's driven for GE $1 billion investment in R&D in wind in the last 10 years. The cost of effective power of wind has come down. The reliability of these units have shot up from 88 to 99%. The ability to capture low wind speeds, which opens up a whole new set of new sites, has been enabled. The issue is not just in the US, but around the world, what we see is customers need predictable, long-term policy. And by the way, in the states in the US that have renewable portfolio standards within their states, they're largely seeing progress to theirs. But if we want to do that on a national level, you need PTC extended, and that's when our customers they need that certainty.
We're going to go to our policy expert in a moment. I just want to ask you, Steve, if wind pulls back in the US, can you make up that capacity in other geographies? And what is the role of solar PV? I mean, I thought it was very interesting that you guys just did your first major sale of a solar PV farm to one of your largest wind customers, Invenergy.
That's right.
I mean, so are you guys going to kind of do the jujitsu of saying if wind falls off, we'll push solar?
You know, the dynamics is where the wind resources aren't necessarily where the solar resources is, and vice versa. But back to your first question, which is, you know, is the rest of the world big enough to offset a U.S. drop in wind? No. I mean, Brazil, India, Canada, China, et cetera, they're all big. But U.S. has been one of the biggest areas in the world. And by the way, if you look at power generation investment in the last 2 or 3 years, the #1 investment area has been wind. Not as far as installed base, but as far as new power generation. And that will shift. When you think of things like solar power, concentrated solar power, by the way, the area we also announced concentrated solar power is in conjunction with a new combined cycle plant. That got us an integrated solar combined cycle plant, which broaches 70% efficiency. So I think, hey, the dynamics in the short term in wind, you need more predictability and sustainability in that wind policy. It's the single biggest driver for what's going to happen with renewable power in the U.S. in the next 12 to 18 months.
Governor Whitman, how do we ensure that we have a diversified energy supply in the U.S.? And the tough question for you is what's going to happen with nuclear in the U.S.? And most people have sort of resigned themselves to the fact that post-Fukushima, new nuclear is not going to be built in the United States. It just can't be financed, even if you can get the licenses.
Well, actually, new nuclear is going forward. You have, for the first time, the Nuclear Regulatory Commission has licensed already 2 new nuclear reactors in Georgia, and 2 more are coming through in South Carolina. And both of those companies feel that while it's important to get the loan guarantees, they still will be able to finance and go forward with the plants without them. And they don't want that. That's not the way they want to operate, but they do think they'll be able to get the capital to be able to move it forward. So they're going forward. And of course, the thing for nuclear, since we haven't built new nuclear in 30 years, that I believe firmly once you get the first 2 going, that the marketplace will start to see, yes, we really are serious about this. Nuclear is 20% of our base power today. It's 70% of our clean power. I mean, if you care about things like climate change, if you care about clean air, air quality, and you care about reliability and affordability and clean, then nuclear is going to be part of that. But to all the points that have been made here, it's a diversified portfolio. And the thing that's really interesting to think about is actually the wind industry and the nuclear industry have been working together on getting the loan guarantees, understanding that it's not an either or. If it goes to one, it's not necessarily not going to go to the other. And the biggest thing that I believe that we have to do is get Congress to understand that what they want is a clean, green, affordable, reliable power. That's the standard we should set out there. Within that, they should not be picking the winners and losers. They should allow the marketplace to do that. And you see that happening because there are different parts of the country where wind makes sense or where solar makes more sense. New Jersey, solar is not going to be a big deal, even though we're #2 in the nation right now in New Jersey, second only to California in solar. I mean, we do a lot of solar in the state of New Jersey, but there's not going to be that much more, and it's not going to carry us through. And while the reliability, if you think about it, the renewables, if you limit things to renewables, they're only about 2.5% of our overall power mix today. If we're really looking at a 25% increase in power demand by 2035, you can't ramp them up enough to meet that need. We can do much better. We will do much better. We will get more investment if we keep the loan guarantees, if we can get Congress to act in anything other than a highly partisan way and one that's really based on policy. But we're still going to need base power. And that means, you know, coal is 48, 49% of our power. It is below 50 now. We can't replace that totally. We're just not going to.
Although gas will hopefully replace it.
Well, gas is giving it a run for its money, but
yeah.
We're going to have oil, we're going to have gas, we're going to have coal, but I believe we're going to have nuclear, and people are starting to see that.
Good.
If I could just add one thing, the folks in the utility industry have learned the lesson over several decades not to, you know, bet everything on one particular technology. So you'll see a lot of people switching to gas right now with low price gas. You're going to see a lot of gas power plants built probably over the next 5 or 10 years. But you know, just as, and I admire them for it. I mean, Southern, you could say on the pure economic basis, maybe a nuclear power plant today, there might be a better option. But again, all of us are looking at 30, 40, in the case of nuclear, probably 60-year
60 years. Yeah.
time frames. And we need to have a diversified supply of power. I mean, our number one objective is keeping the lights on for our customers, and we take that very seriously. So I'm not so worried about everybody rushing off and just doing 100% whatever for the given moment is the lowest cost or most attractive value proposition. We will continue to have a diversified mix in the United States.
I think the only thing I'd add on nuclear is just if you think about it, places like Abu Dhabi's building, Taiwan continues to build, China continues to build. I mean, the rest of the world is building. I lived in France for 2 years. 70–80% of the power is nuclear. You know, it plays a very key role in clean, affordable power. The issue is also today is that power plant, you know, is significant billions of dollars of investment. And many of the areas that are going forward have the right long-term policy and support to allow those investments to take place.
Let's do a poll question so everybody here can get involved. Here's what we're going to ask. Today, wind and solar, just wind and solar, generate about 3% of the electricity in the United States. By 2020, we need you to predict, and we'll see how optimistic you are. It will grow to A, 5%, B, 10%, C, 15%, and D, 20%. And so you can text your code there, and we'll see what the answers are. In the meantime, let's talk about solar PV and where you think it's going, Lou. I mean, do you believe that solar PV can come down in price to be at grid parity with baseload sources like coal and nuclear?
Yeah, for coal and nuclear, yes. At $2 gas, I'm not sure I would bet on that just yet. I mean, there's a big difference between $2 gas and coal and nuclear if you look at what the all-in life cycle costs are of that energy. But solar has been, particularly PV, you know, we started out and
But even distributed without the T&D costs, I mean.
Boy, don't get me started there. That's a false economic. So, I mean, you know, most utilities have net metering today. And so you can say if let's say your rate's 10 cents, you just have to beat 10 cents. But sooner or later, the rate structure is going to have to evolve to say you're still getting, unless you're going to disconnect from the grid and then have batteries and everything else that goes along with it, you're still getting backup from the grid. You're either supplying power to the grid or you're taking power from the grid, and you've got to pay for that, and there's a cost to that. So to me, the real parity is the wholesale power prices. Yeah. And that's a much lower price than what your retail price of power is. But PV is coming down fast. Every time I turn around and we are building another project, we are blown away by the proposals we've been given on PV. So, you know, I would never, there's a saying, you never bet against technology, you never bet against the engineers. And in this case, I sure wouldn't bet against them. But it's still going to take some time. And, you know, right now, I mean, yeah, the production tax credits for solar go through 2016, but just really the way it works, if you don't have a project in the ground this year, there's not a whole lot more that will be built. So again, public policy really matters here.
Let's look at our results, then we'll go to Governor Whitman. It looks like almost half the people in the room think that solar and wind will be at 10% of the electricity generation mix in the U.S. The Department of Energy's Energy Information Agency puts the number at less than 4%, so this is an optimistic group. Governor Whitman.
Well, I wanted to just add one thing here. That one of the things, particularly with solar, that we need to remember is China. I mean, let's not forget it, and let's not forget what it is doing to lock up various energy sources and rare earth metals and the kinds of things that are needed as we move forward on the technology on the solar panels. It's going to be a player here, and that's why I think it's so important.
So from a policy standpoint, sorry, let me just ask you, since we're running out of time, what should we do about that? Should we, you know, be tough on China about that? Should we have trade, you know,
fair trade that goes
restrictions?
both ways wouldn't be an all bad thing, just as a starter. But it's more that we need to, it goes back to our need to have an energy policy in this country that sends some strong signals so that the kind of investment that we need, people will pay attention to it and will watch what's happening. For China overall, I mean, you know, it's such a big player, we have to recognize it, but I do think that a fair trade equally applied to both sides. If they do not want us to deliver to China fully completed solar panels, then frankly, we shouldn't let them do it here. We should.
You guys agree?
And we're providing a lot of their.
Well, like was said, is China's from a new gigawatts put on the market every year is now the biggest single one in the world. It's been heavily coal oriented, but it's shifting over time. But I agree with this statement here, which has to be a kind of a two-way street. And we have significant investments within China as we build out our businesses there. So it's one, though, that we just got to continue to work this one over time.
Let's get some questions from the audience. I think I have someone here. Can we get a microphone, please? Keep it brief, please.
Sure. Theo Spencer with the Natural Resources Defense Council. One thing that hasn't been discussed is energy efficiency and combined heat and power. And Governor, you mentioned the potential growth in power demand going out to 2035. You know, the states have done decoupling. I'm just curious, it seems that it's very difficult to finance efficiency at a large scale. And so I'm wondering what role you see for energy efficiency just as a function of or overall supply or reduced supply, and how to get those projects going on a larger scale.
I think that's going to be a very important part of going forward. It's part of when you talk about green power, we also need to talk about what we can do with conservation, both at the large scale, at the corporate level, and production level, and at, frankly, individual homeowner. I mean, one of the hardest things that we have to convey is the impact that happens from individual behavior, the cumulative impact of individual behavior. People tend to dismiss what they can do and the impact they're going to have because what am I? I'm one person, I'm not going to make a difference. The interesting thing from a corporate point of view is we are seeing more and more, at least on the boards on which I serve, more of the shareholders starting to put in shareholder proposals asking the companies to benchmark their carbon footprint, benchmark their greenhouse gases, benchmark their efficiencies, and many corporations are moving to improve on all those things as well as water usage, which is something that's enormously important because it's good for business. It's good for them. It helps them save money, and that's really where I think the conservation angle for the big corporations is going to come because it makes sense. It's financially makes sense, and frankly, power demand is going to be such it's not going to hurt a utility to have people be a little more sensitive in how they're using their power.
One thing I find interesting to look at is if you look across the states, because this is really a state policy issue. Our regulated utilities in Florida, and Florida's been pretty aggressive on energy efficiency, and I do think that we've shown, and I think utilities in California and elsewhere have shown, that programs administered through utilities, because we're already touching every one of those customers, can be quite effective. But if you just benchmark across the states and take the top quartile states and compare it to all the rest and said, if all the other states were brought up to the bottom of that top quartile in energy efficiency, so this is using stuff we already know. I mean, much of it's, frankly, very old, well-established technology. We could reduce the carbon emissions of the largest single carbon emitter in the electric utility industry. I'm not going to name the name, I think most of you know it, but it is hundreds and hundreds of millions of tons of carbon a year, and a lot of natural resources saved at the same time.
Just a very quick comment back to your comment on combined heat and power. Big opportunity. Back to the point on policy, though. Two of the biggest areas we see for combined heat and power investments going forward in the world right now, Russia and China. And part of that is because it's built into their policy regime. And one of the proposals that's been put to discussion over the last 2 or 3 years for a clean energy policy for the United States would include combined heat and power. So again, that's part of the investment. Definitely energy efficiency in many of our customers' cases is some of the best return on investment for their projects as they see going forward. But that sustainable, predictable policy is really critical.
We've got a couple other questions. I want to invite people who want to speak about clean energy transportation, too, to ask questions. We have a question right here.
Thanks. Amy Christensen with the United Nations on Sustainable Energy for All. And earlier we heard about lights out and what that can do to people and the opportunities when people get access to energy. And I was interested in GE's announcement recently to launch a whole new arm focused on distributed energy, and $200 million alone you all are investing this year. And I was curious about that and what opportunities you see there for clean energy to be the solution given the high prices that people pay in developing countries for kerosene and diesel and other solutions.
I'd say there are two pieces to that. One of which is we lose sight of 1.3 billion people in the world do not have access to power today. So even with all the investment around the world, and that's going to continue to grow. And if you look at a lot of that growth and bringing power to those people in the world, it's going to be not centralized generation. These are places in the world that don't have transmission lines. They don't have the ability to site a 1 gigawatt nuclear power plant. So it's going to be smaller power. It's going to be fuel flexible. Some of these places, they're only going to be able to get diesel in the short term. So over time, it could be solar, it could be aeroderivative power, it could be gas power. It's going to evolve over time. Some of these areas in the world flare gas. By the way, if they could just burn that gas in power generation, it's good for the environment, good for gas power generation, good for people bringing up power. Back to your point on transport, a lot of focus on that. GE announced just a partnership with Chesapeake because there just needs to be more focused attention on the use of that potentially going forward. But that distributed hour initiative is really about, as we see the next 20, 30 years of bringing power to those 1.3 billion people that don't have it, a lot of it's not centralized.
Okay. I see a question back there. There's a mic. Real quick.
Hi, Arno Harris, CEO of Recurrent Energy. I really want to commend the panel for, I think, moving the dialogue beyond what's been kind of the false dilemma between sort of natural gas versus renewables, and really taking us to where I think we need to go, which is a conversation about all the above. And I think the interesting conversation that we go to from there is, in an all of the above framework, what's the order or the set of principles we use for thinking about the resources we use and what priorities given to them? So are we, to put it simply, are we going to go mostly gas with a little bit of wind and solar on the side to kind of green it? Or are we going to go as much wind and solar as we can and sort of blend gas in to keep costs reasonable and keep the grid reliable?
And I want to add a little spin to that, which is if there is a role for paying attention to job creation and the quality of those jobs in thinking about the mix of those energy resources.
Well, doesn't it all come down to what the government policy is? We talked a lot several years ago at this conference about whether we were going to have cap and trade or a price on carbon or whatever. But if there is no consensus on government policy, you're going to see people gravitate, at least short term, to whatever is the cheapest, most economic thing they can do, given the way the markets work. And if there's no price on carbon, no clean energy standard, no requirements, no renewable portfolio standard, whatever, I think it's going to, at least short term, with $2 gas, you're going to see mostly gas, and you'll see a little bit of, we'll do things like maybe because we want some diversity, we might build another nuclear power plant or expand some nuclear power plants or add some renewables here or there, but it's going to be pretty heavily tilted towards gas. So it really comes back to policy.
I couldn't agree more. I think it's just absolutely essential that we get a signal from the federal government about what the base is going to be. The states are going to move forward, and that's something they're already doing. We in New Jersey deregulated early on, and we did put in a requirement on green power, and we put an aspirational goal of reducing carbon footprint, and that was early in the process. And that's going to continue to happen. But that's a nightmare for any corporation, any business, any utility to try to meet 50 different sets of standards. And I will venture to say that if there were a federal floor put in as to what we want as far as percentage of green power or renewable power, but I'd say clean and green, because that's what we want, and because I believe nuclear has a role to play there, then most of the states would bow to that and say, we'll go with that one rather than set their own.
We are out of time. I guess I will use the moderator's prerogative to try to make news with the last question. Lou Hay announced a few weeks ago that he's stepping down as CEO of NextEra on July 1. He remains as executive chairman through 2013. But if asked by either candidate to be Secretary of Energy, would you do so?
No
Since policy is the thing we need to solve.
No comment.
I tried, guys.
I don't think
tried.
anybody's going to be asking me anyhow, so it's kind of a moot question.
Please join me in thanking this terrific panel.
Pleasure. But, you know, look right at Turkey Point. I want 2 more reactors here.
Had to go for that. That's good. Stand behind me over here because they're going to, I'm sorry, just doing a little choreography. They're going to walk by.